Imagine walking into a room full of predators, where one wrong move means death. That was Audrey Bennett's Tuesday morning. She stood before Dominic Hale, the alpha king of the Obsidian Pack, a man rumoured to have buried more enemies than he has friends. The air was thick enough to choke on. But then, the unthinkable happened. The alpha's feral protected son lunged. Razor-sharp teeth sank into Audrey's sleeve. The entire court froze. Guards reached for their weapons. But Audrey, she didn't scream, she didn't run. She smiled, and she tugged back. What happened next changed the fate of the entire pack. The GPS on Audrey Bennett's beat-up Honda Civic had lost the signal 3 miles back. Now, she was navigating the winding, fog-laden roads of the Pacific Northwest by sheer instinct and a crumbled map she'd printed at the library. She wasn't supposed to be here. Humans were aware of the closed territories, vast stretches of land owned by private corporations that were essentially fronts for the packs, but they never entered them. Not unless they had a death wish or, in Audrey's case, a mountain of student debt and a reputation as the best behavioral therapist for difficult cases in the tri-state area. She pulled up to the iron gates of Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of stone and dark timber that seemed to grow out of the mountain itself. A guard approached the car. He didn't look like a rent-a-cop. He looked like a mercenary who wrestled bears for cardio. "Audrey Bennett," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hale." The guard sniffed the air, visibly sniffed it, before grunting and opening the gate. Audrey parked and grabbed her satchel. Inside were flashcards, sensory toys, and her resume. She took a deep breath. "It's just a wealthy, eccentric family," she told herself. "Just a rich, single dad with a kid who has behavioral issues. You can do this." She was escorted into the great hall. The room was cavernous, lit by a roaring fireplace that could roast a whole ox, and it was filled with people. Men and women in expensive, dark clothing lined the walls. They were beautiful, terrifyingly fit, and all of them stopped talking the moment she stepped onto the runner rug. The silence wasn't polite. It was predatory. At the far end, sitting in a high-backed leather chair that looked suspiciously like a throne, was Dominic Hale. He was larger than life. Even sitting down, his shoulders were broad enough to block out the firelight. He wore a charcoal button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a long, jagged scar running from his elbow to his wrist. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they bored into her. "You're the human," Dominic said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Audrey's chest. "I'm Audrey Bennett," she corrected, stepping forward. "The occupational therapist. My advisors tell me you're the best with non-verbal trauma," Dominic said, standing up. He moved with a lethal grace that made the hairs on Audrey's arms stand up. "But my son isn't a human child, Miss Bennett. He is a wolf, and he does not take kindly to strangers." "Children are children, Mr. Hale," Audrey said, holding her ground. "Trauma manifests universally." A murmur went through the room. Someone whispered, "She has a spine." Another whispered, "She'll be dead by lunch." "Is that so?" Dominic stepped closer, looming over her. The scent of him, pine, rain, and raw power, was overwhelming. "Toby has gone through 6 nannies and 3 doctors in a month. He doesn't need flashcards. He needs—" Scritch. Scritch. The sound came from behind the heavy velvet curtains near the window. A low growl followed. It wasn't the growl of a dog. It was deep, guttural, and wet. A small boy, no older than 5, emerged on all 4s. He was naked, covered in dirt, his hair a matted mess of dark curls. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide. This was Toby, the alpha pup. "Toby," Dominic said, his voice softening instantly. "Stand up, son." Toby ignored him. He locked eyes with Audrey. The court held its breath. The boy crouched, muscles bunching. "Don't move," Dominic commanded Audrey, his hand twitching toward his waist as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "He smells your fear." "I'm not afraid," Audrey lied. She slowly lowered her satchel to the floor. Toby lunged. He moved faster than any human child should. He was a blur of motion. Audrey didn't have time to flinch. The boy slammed into her legs, not to hug, but to attack. His teeth, sharp, milk teeth that looked too pointed, sank into the thick wool of her blazer sleeve, just above the wrist. Gasps erupted around the room. "Toby, release!" Dominic roared, stepping forward, his eyes flashing a glowing amber. The guards unholstered sidearms. The atmosphere shattered into pure violence. If the human jerked away, the pup would tear flesh. If the alpha grabbed the pup, the boy's instincts would shatter. The room fell deadly silent, but Audrey didn't scream. She didn't yank her arm away. She looked down at the boy, whose jaw was locked onto her expensive J. Crew blazer. He was growling, vibrating with rage and fear. Audrey smiled, a genuine soft smile. "Well," she said, her voice calm and conversational, cutting through the tension. "That is a very strong grip, Toby. But this is cashmere, and I'm afraid it tastes terrible." She didn't pull away. Instead, she tugged her arm toward him, gently, playfully. Toby blinked. The resistance confused him. Prey pulled away. Prey screamed. Prey didn't... Play back. He loosened his jaw, just a fraction, looking up at her with confused amber eyes. "There you are," Audrey whispered. She slowly reached into her pocket with her free hand. Dominic took a step, ready to intercept, thinking she had a weapon. She pulled out a small, blue, sensory squishy ball. She rolled it across the floor. "If you want to bite something, bite this," she said. "It squeaks." Toby released her sleeve. He looked at the ball. He looked at his father. Then he snatched the ball with his teeth and scrambled back under the curtains. Audrey stood up, brushing a little slobber off her sleeve. She looked at Dominic, who was frozen halfway to her, his face a mask of absolute shock. "He has oral fixation due to anxiety," Audrey said, adjusting her glasses. "We can work on that. Now, where can I set up my office?" Dominic Hale, the Alpha King who terrified entire nations, stared at the small woman in the sensible shoes. For the first time in 3 years, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Victor," Dominic barked at the man beside him. "Get Miss Bennett a room. The best one." The guest room was larger than Audrey's entire apartment back in Seattle. It had a 4-poster bed, a fireplace, and a view of the dense tree line that seemed to stretch on forever. But Audrey couldn't relax. She sat on the edge of the bed, examining her wrist. The fabric of her blazer was ruined, but the skin beneath was only bruised, not broken. She had been lucky. A knock at the door made her jump. "Enter!" she called out. The door opened, and Dominic Hale walked in. He had changed into a black sweater, making him look slightly less like a warlord and more like a brooding romance novel cover model, which, Audrey noted with annoyance, made him even more dangerous. He didn't come alone. He was followed by an older man with silver hair and a face like a dried apple. This was Victor Crowley, the pack's beta and Dominic's advisor. Victor looked at Audrey as if she were a cockroach on a wedding cake. "Miss Bennett," Dominic said, closing the door. "We need to discuss the terms of your employment." "I assume the term is hazard pay," Audrey said, standing up. "Double your asking rate," Dominic said immediately, "plus room and board, and a bonus if you can get him to speak a full sentence by winter." Audrey blinked. That's generous. It's necessary, Victor interjected, his voice raspy. But there are rules, strict ones. Victor stepped forward, placing a thick document on the table. You do not leave the grounds without an escort. You do not enter the West Wing. You do not speak to the press. And you do not ask questions about our family medical history. Audrey looked at the contract. Mr. Crowley, I can't treat Toby if I don't know his medical history. Why is he non-verbal? Was there a traumatic brain injury? A shock? His mother died, Dominic said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 2 years ago. He hasn't spoken a word since. He shifts, changes, uncontrollably when he's upset. He is stuck between forms. Audrey softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Hale, but locking him away in a room full of terrified adults isn't helping. He needs socialization. He needs to feel safe, not like a bomb waiting to go off. He is a bomb, Victor snapped. He is the future alpha. If he shows weakness, the other families will circle like vultures. He must be strong. He is 5, Audrey argued, surprised by her own boldness. He doesn't need to be strong. He needs to be a child. Dominic watched her, his eyes tracking her pulse point. He could hear her heart rate. It was elevated, but steady. She was fighting for his son. Nobody had done that. They all fought for the alpha heir, but nobody fought for Toby. Victor, leave us, Dominic commanded. But Alpha, leave. Victor scowled, shot a glare at Audrey, and exited. Dominic walked over to the window, looking out at the moon. You have no idea what you've walked into, Audrey. I've worked in juvenile detention centers, Mr. Hale. I've seen bad. Dominic turned, a sad, dark laugh escaping him. You're in a house of wolves, literal wolves. We aren't a metaphor. We are predators. My son bit you because his instinct is to dominate or destroy. If you stay, you are in danger every single day. Why did you hire me then? Dominic looked at her, his gaze intense. Because when he bit you, you didn't smell like fear. You smelled like patience. And that is the one thing I don't have. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. He placed it on the table. It was for $50,000. An advance. 1 week, Dominic said. If he doesn't improve, or if he hurts you, you leave. No questions asked. Audrey looked at the check, then at Dominic. She thought of Toby's terrified eyes under the curtain. She thought of the squishy ball he had taken. I don't need the money to care, Mr. Hale, she said quietly. But I'll take the job, on one condition. Dominic raised an eyebrow. You are bargaining with the king? I want access to the grounds, fresh air. Toby can't heal in a dungeon. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. The tension stretched, thick and electric. Then he nodded. Done. But you take a guard. Always. The first 3 days were a nightmare. Toby refused to come out from under the furniture. He threw books. He growled. He shredded 3 pillows. But Audrey sat there. She didn't force him. She sat on the floor, reading children's books aloud, ignoring his tantrums. On the 4th day, Audrey was sitting in the garden, under the watchful eye of a guard named Silas, tossing the blue ball up and down. She sensed movement in the bushes. Toby was there. He was watching her. He was still dirty, wearing only a pair of torn shorts. I bet you can't catch this, Audrey said, not looking at him. She tossed the ball gently toward the bush. A pause. Then a small, grimy hand reached out and grabbed it. Good throw, Audrey said. Suddenly a shadow fell over them. It wasn't Dominic. It was a woman. She was tall, with platinum blonde hair and a dress that cost more than Audrey's life. She looked at Toby with undisguised disgust. "So this is the mongrel," the woman sneered. Audrey stood up immediately, placing herself between the woman and the bush. "Excuse me?" The woman laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "I'm Lydia. Dominic's intended. And you must be the nanny." "Therapist," Audrey corrected. "Whatever." Lydia waved a hand. "Don't get too comfortable. Once I'm Luna, that boy goes to boarding school. We can't have a broken heir embarrassing the pack." From the bushes, a low, menacing growl started. "Toby, no!" Audrey whispered, reaching a hand back. Lydia stepped closer, her eyes flashing red. "Control the brat, or I will." Toby burst from the bushes, partially shifted, claws extended, aiming for Lydia. Lydia didn't flinch. She raised a hand, her nails lengthening into claws, ready to strike the child. "No!" Audrey screamed. She didn't think. She threw herself over Toby, shielding his small body with her own. She waited for the blow. She waited for the claws to shred her back. Instead, there was a thunderous roar that shook the ground beneath them. Audrey looked up. Dominic was there. He had shifted. A massive, midnight black wolf, the size of a horse, stood over Audrey and Toby. His teeth were bared at Lydia, and a sound like tearing metal came from his chest. The alpha was protecting his pup, and, Audrey realized with a jolt, he was protecting her. The silence in the garden following Dominic's roar was absolute. The massive black wolf stood panting, his amber eyes burning into Lydia. She had recoiled, falling onto the perfectly manicured grass, her face a mask of terror and humiliation. Beneath Audrey, Toby was trembling violently. Audrey didn't move. She kept her arms wrapped tightly around the small, dirty boy, pressing his face into her shoulder so he wouldn't have to see the monster his father had become to protect them. The wolf took a step toward Lydia, a low growl vibrating in his massive chest. "Dominic, stop!" Audrey's voice was thin but firm. "You're frightening him." The wolf froze. His massive head snapped toward Audrey. The intelligence in those amber eyes was undeniable, warring with pure animal instinct. He looked at the woman curled around his cub, protecting the very child who had bitten her just days ago. With a sound like cracking bone, Dominic shifted. It was violent and fast. One moment a wolf, the next a man, naked and breathing hard, kneeling in the grass. Silas, the ever-present guard, immediately threw a dark cloak over his alpha's shoulders. Dominic stood, tying the cloak. He didn't look at Audrey yet. He looked at Lydia. "Get out of my sight," he said, his voice a ragged whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "Dominic, she provoked me. The mongrel!" Lydia stammered, scrambling to her feet. "If you ever call my son that again, political alliance be damned. I will tear out your throat. Leave the estate. Do not return until summoned." Lydia, pale with rage and fear, fled the garden. Only then did Dominic turn to Audrey. He dropped to one knee, his eyes scanning her frantically. "Did she hurt you? Did I hurt you?" Audrey sat up, pulling Toby into her lap. The boy was whimpering now, rubbing his eyes with grimy fists. "We're fine," Audrey said, her heart still hammering against her ribs. "But that wasn't helping Toby feel safe, Mr. Hale." Dominic flinched, as if she'd struck him. "It's what we are, Audrey. Violence is our language. It doesn't have to be his." Audrey stood up, lifting Toby. The boy was heavy, but she didn't care. "I'm taking him inside to get cleaned up. No more trauma today." Dominic watched them go, a strange ache in his chest. He was the Alpha King, feared by thousands. Yet this small human woman just scolded him like a naughty puppy, walked away with his feral son in her arms, and he liked it. That evening the breakthrough happened. Audrey had managed to get Toby into a warm bath. It took 40 minutes of coaxing, but once he was in the water, He relaxed. She washed the matted dirt from his hair, revealing glossy black curls identical to his father's. She wrapped him in a fluffy towel and sat him on the rug in front of the fireplace in her room. She didn't try to make him talk. She just sat near him, reading a book about a bear who lost his hat. The fire crackled. It was peaceful. Toby stopped playing with the squishy blue ball. He crawled over to where Audrey sat, cross-legged on the floor. He hesitated, sniffing her sleeve, the one he hadn't bitten. It smelled of lavender detergent and just her. He leaned his head against her knee. Audrey froze. She kept reading, keeping her voice steady, not wanting to spook him. Toby reached out a small hand and touched the bruise on her wrist where his teeth had left their mark days ago. He looked up at her, his large eyes filled with a terrible sadness. He opened his mouth. His voice was raspy from disuse, tiny and rough like sandpaper. "Stay." It was barely a whisper, but Audrey heard it. Tears pricked behind her eyes, but she forced herself to smile, that same calm, reassuring smile from the first day. She gently covered his small hand on her wrist with her own. "I'm not going anywhere, Toby." While Audrey was making history upstairs, Victor Crowley was downstairs in the Alpha's study, pouring poison into Dominic's ear. "The human is a liability, Alpha," Victor said, swirling a glass of amber liquid. "Lydia is furious. Her father, Alpha Hemlock of the Southern Pack, has already called twice demanding an apology. We need their territory for the supply lines." "Lydia threatened my son," Dominic said, staring out the dark window. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Audrey had thrown herself over Toby. No wolf would have done that without hesitation. Self-preservation was too strong. "Lydia is high-strung. But she is wolf. She understands our ways. This Audrey woman is making you soft. You hesitated in the garden. You let a human dictate terms. She's helping him, Victor. He's calmer. Is he? Or is she just training him like a pet?" Victor placed his empty glass down with a sharp clink. "There are rumors, Dominic. Rumors that the recent perimeter breaches by the rogues aren't coincidental. Someone on the inside is feeding them patrol schedules." Dominic turned sharply. "Impossible. My guard is loyal." "Are they? Or is there someone new in the house? Someone who asks too many questions? Someone who wanders the grounds? Audrey?" Dominic growled. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just saying, she's the only variable. We should search her room, just to be sure. To clear her name, of course." Dominic hesitated. It felt like a betrayal of the fragile trust he was building with Audrey. But his duty to the pack was paramount. If there was a leak, people would die. "Fine," Dominic said heavily. "Search it while she's bathing, Toby. But if you find nothing, Victor, you will apologize to her yourself." Victor smiled thinly. "Of course, Alpha." Victor left the study. He didn't need to search. He just needed his operative, a young, impressionable guard he'd bribed to plant what needed to be found. Audrey woke up the next morning feeling lighter than she had in years. Toby had spoken. He had slept in a real bed, a cot she pulled next to hers, for the entire night without nightmares. She got dressed and went down to the kitchen to get breakfast for them, humming softly. The kitchen staff fell silent when she entered. That wasn't unusual. They were all terrified of her since the biting incident. But this silence felt different. It felt heavy. Before she could reach the coffee pot, the kitchen door swung open. 4 guards, led by Silas, marched in. Their faces were grim. "Miss Bennett," Silas said, his voice flat. "You need to come with us." "What happened? Is Toby okay?" Panic flared in her chest. "The pup is fine. He is with the Alpha. You are under arrest." "Arrest? For what?" Silas didn't answer. He took her arm, not gently, and escorted her out of the main house toward a stone outbuilding that looked suspiciously like a dungeon. They took her phone and her satchel. They placed her in a small, cold room with a metal cot and a heavy iron door. "Wait! You can't just lock me in here. What am I accused of?" she yelled, banging on the door. A small viewing slot slid open. Victor's pale eyes stared at her. "Espionage, Miss Bennett. Treason against the Obsidian Pack. Punishable by death." The slot slammed shut. Audrey slid down the cold wall, stunned. 2 hours later, the door opened. It was Dominic. He looked worse than she felt. His eyes were rimmed with red, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered in his cheek. He didn't step inside the cell. He stood in the doorway, filling the space. "Tell me it isn't true," he said. His voice was devoid of the warmth she had started to hear in it. This was the voice of the Alpha King. "Tell you what isn't true? I don't even know what's happening." Audrey stood up, facing him. Dominic threw a plastic bag onto the cot. Inside was a cheap burner phone and a folded piece of paper. "We found these taped under the drawer in your bedside table. The phone has texts sent to an unknown number. Texts detailing the shift changes of the Western Perimeter Guards, the exact spot where rogues broke through 3 nights ago and killed 2 of my kin." Audrey gasped. She picked up the bag, horrified. "Dominic, I have never seen these before. I don't even know what a Western Perimeter is. I'm a therapist. A therapist with a mountain of debt who suddenly shows up at the most secretive park in the territory, unafraid of an alpha pup." Dominic stepped closer, his scent rolling off him in angry waves, smoke and ozone. "It's a perfect cover. I wasn't afraid because I saw a scared child, not a monster, and you know that." Audrey stepped right up to him, refusing to back down. "Someone planted this. Someone who wants me gone. Who? Who would profit from framing a human nanny?" "Lydia," Audrey snapped. "Or your charming advisor, Victor. They hate me. Accusing high-ranking pack members without proof will not help your case," Dominic growled, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. "And condemning me with planted proof will not help your son. He spoke last night, Dominic. He told me to stay. If you kill me, you kill any chance he has of recovery." Dominic froze. "He spoke?" "Yes. And if you weren't so blinded by your paranoid wolf politics, you'd see that I am the only one here actually trying to save him." Dominic stared at her. He wanted to believe her. Every instinct in his body screamed that she was telling the truth. Her scent was clean, no deception, just righteous anger and fear. But the physical evidence was damning, and the pack demanded justice for the fallen guards. "There will be a tribunal tonight," Dominic said gruffly. "The elders will judge you. If you are innocent, prove it then." He turned and left, the heavy door clanging shut behind him, leaving Audrey alone in the dark. The tribunal was held in the Great Hall, the same place Audrey had first met Dominic and Toby. But the atmosphere was vastly different now. The fireplace was dim. 5 ancient-looking men and women, the elders, sat on raised dais. Dominic sat to the side on his throne, his face unreadable. Victor stood in the center of the room, looking smug. Even Lydia was there, sitting in the gallery, wearing black and looking tragically vindicated. Audrey was led in, her hands loosely bound with zip ties. She was positioned in the center of the rug. Victor began the proceedings. He painted a picture of a cunning human spy, infiltrating the pack to sell secrets to their enemies for cash to pay off her debts. He presented the burner phone. He presented bank statements showing her loans. The elders muttered, looking at Audrey with cold, inhuman eyes. "What say you, human?" The eldest elder, a woman with hair like spun silver, demanded. Audrey took a deep breath. She stood up straight, rolling her shoulders back. She remembered Toby's little hand on her wrist. "I say this is ridiculous," Audrey said clearly, her voice echoing in the hall. "I have been here for 5 days. I have been under constant surveillance by your guards. When exactly did I have time to map your perimeter? I have spent every waking moment coaxing a 5-year-old boy out from under a sofa." She turned to face Dominic directly. "You hired me because I saw the human in your son when everyone else saw a beast. Now I'm asking you to see the human in me, and not the enemy you fear." The room was silent. Dominic's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly the wood creaked. "Noble words," Victor sneered. "But we have proof." The phone traced to her room. "A room you have keys to, Victor," Audrey shot back. Victor bristled. "How dare you?" "Enough!" The Silver Elder raised a hand. She looked at Dominic. "Alpha Hale. The evidence is strong, but her scent, it does not carry the taint of deceit. The decision is yours. Do we execute the spy, or do we investigate further?" The weight of the entire room fell on Dominic. Lydia was watching him, expecting him to choose duty and her. Victor was watching, expecting him to choose strength. Dominic stood up. He walked down the steps of the dais until he was standing in front of Audrey. He looked deep into her defiant brown eyes. "If I release you, and you are guilty, my pack will never trust me again," he said softly, for her ears only. "If you execute me, and I am innocent, you will never forgive yourself," she whispered back. Dominic closed his eyes for a second. He made his choice. He turned to the elders. "There is doubt. Our laws state that if there is doubt, we cannot spill blood. She will be placed under strict house arrest, confined to her room. No access to the boy until a full investigation is complete." Lydia gasped in outrage from the gallery. Victor looked furious. Audrey felt relief wash over her, followed immediately by crushing despair. "No access to Toby," she pleaded. "Dominic, please. He just started to trust me. This will break him." "It is the ruling of the Alpha," Dominic said, his voice cold and distant again. He couldn't look at her. "Take her away." As the guards dragged Audrey back toward her room, she caught a glimpse of Victor in the crowd. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Lydia, and he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It wasn't just Victor. It was both of them. They were working together. And now they had successfully isolated Toby again. The real danger hadn't been averted. It had just begun. The house arrest was suffocating. Audrey's prison was still her luxurious bedroom, but the windows were locked, and a guard was posted outside her door 24/7. Her only connection to the outside world was the tray of food Silas brought her 3 times a day. For 3 days, she heard nothing. No news of the investigation. No word from Dominic. And, most painfully, no Toby. She paced the room until she had worn a path in the plush carpet. She knew Toby would be regressing. Without the routine, without the sensory play, the anxiety would be eating him alive. On the 4th night, the silence of the house was shattered. It started with a howl, distant, agonizing, and unmistakably Dominic. Then came the alarms. High-pitched modern security sirens mixed with the primal baying of wolves. Audrey ran to the door and pounded on it. "Silas! What's happening? Let me out!" There was no answer. The guard was gone. She tried the handle, locked. Desperate, she grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the bedside table and smashed it against the lock mechanism. It didn't budge. She wasn't a wolf. She was just a woman with a lamp. Suddenly, the lock clicked. The door swung open. It wasn't Silas. It was Lydia. The blonde woman stood there, looking pale and disheveled, her dress torn at the hem. She looked terrified. but not for herself. "You," Lydia breathed, staring at Audrey. "You have to help." "Excuse me." Audrey gripped the lamp like a club. "You framed me." "I did," Lydia admitted, her voice shaking. "Victor said we would just scare you off. He said we would send you back to the city so I could take my place as Luna. He didn't tell me about the rogues." "What about the rogues?" Audrey stepped forward. "They're here. They bypassed the alarms using the codes Victor gave them. They took Toby." The blood drained from Audrey's face. "They took him? Victor betrayed us. He's working with the Southern Pack, my father's pack. But my father, he hates weakness. He hates mixed breeds. He doesn't want Toby for ransom. He wants to eliminate the stain on the bloodline before I marry Dominic." Lydia was crying now, ugly, gasping sobs. She was a mean, petty woman, but she hadn't signed up for child murder. "Where is Dominic?" Audrey demanded, dropping the lamp. "He's gone after them, but it's a trap. Victor led him into the canyon. They'll ambush him. And Toby is still in the house. Or he was. I saw them taking him toward the old supply tunnels." "Why come to me?" Audrey asked. "Because the tunnels are rigged with wolfsbane gas," Lydia whispered. "Dominic or any of the guards go down there. They'll be weakened, paralyzed. You're human. The gas won't hurt you." Audrey didn't hesitate. She grabbed her sneakers and shoved her feet into them. "Show me where the entrance is." Lydia led her through the chaotic hallways. Guards were running everywhere, shouting orders. They slipped into the servants' quarters and down into the basement. Lydia pushed aside a heavy wine rack to reveal a damp, dark tunnel entrance. "This leads to the old mines under the mountain," Lydia said. "They'll take him to the extraction point at the North Ridge. You have to get to him before they get him out of the tunnels." "What are you going to do?" Audrey asked. "I'm going to find Dominic," Lydia said, her eyes hardening. "I have to warn him about the ambush. If I die, tell him. Tell him I tried to fix it." Lydia turned and ran back upstairs. Audrey took a breath, plunged into the darkness, and ran toward the wolves. The tunnels were cold and smelled of sulfur and decay. Audrey used the flashlight function on the burner phone she'd kept hidden. Ironically, the one planted to frame her. She ran until her lungs burned. She could hear echoes ahead, heavy boots, low growls. She killed the light and crept forward, hugging the wall. Ahead, in a wider cavern lit by a few electric lanterns, stood 3 men. They were huge, rough-looking shifters. In the center, tied up and gagged with duct tape, was Toby. He was thrashing, his eyes wild with terror. He was partially shifting, patches of fur erupting on his skin, his fingers turning into claws and back again. The stress was tearing him apart. "Quit squirming, brat," one of the men growled, kicking dust at him, "or I'll knock you out." "Careful," another laughed. "Boss wants him alive until we get to the ridge, wants the king to watch him die." Audrey's heart hammered so loud she thought they'd hear it. She was one human woman against 3 massive predators. She had no weapons. She had no backup. But she had knowledge. She looked around the cavern. It was an old mining junction. There were rusted mine carts, old tools, and a ventilation box on the wall labeled "Emergency Air Shutoff." She remembered something Dominic had said about wolf senses. They are overwhelmed by strong stimuli. Sounds, smells. Audrey crept toward the ventilation box. Next to it was an old fire alarm box, the old-fashioned kind with a heavy metal bell. She picked up a heavy iron wrench from the floor. She looked at Toby. "Hold on, baby," she thought. She smashed the wrench into the fire alarm box. Clang! 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 The sound was deafening in the enclosed stone space. It echoed and amplified, bouncing off the walls like gunshots. The 3 wolves screamed, clapping their hands over their sensitive ears, dropping to their knees. The noise was excruciating for them. Audrey didn't stop. She ran into the light, grabbed a handful of dirt, and threw it right into the face of the nearest guard, blinding him. She reached Toby. She didn't try to untie the complex knots. She grabbed him, duct tape and all, and hoisted him up. He was heavy, dead weight with fear. "Run, Toby! Hold on to me!" She sprinted for a side tunnel, a narrow chute that looked too small for the massive men to fit through easily. "Get her!" one of the men roared, fighting through the pain of the noise. Audrey scrambled into the chute, Toby clinging to her neck. She could hear them scrambling behind her, snarling like beasts. "Down here," she whispered, sliding down a steep, rocky incline. They tumbled into darkness, sliding through shale and mud until they hit the bottom with a thud. They were in a lower level of the mine. It was pitch black. "Toby," Audrey whispered, ripping the tape off his mouth. "Are you okay?" "Audrey," he sobbed, burying his face in her neck. "Audrey, Audrey, I've got you. Shh. We have to be quiet." She could hear the men above, cursing. They were too big to fit down the chute. They would have to go the long way around. That gave them maybe 10 minutes. "We need to find a way out," Audrey whispered. She stood up, holding Toby's hand. "Smell," Toby said suddenly. "What?" "Smell. Outside." He pointed into the pitch blackness to their left. Audrey couldn't smell anything but damp earth. But Toby was a wolf. Even terrified, his nose worked. "Lead the way, sweetie," she said. They moved through the dark. Audrey stumbled, scraping her knees, but she kept moving. Toby gripped her hand so tight his nails dug in, but she didn't complain. After what felt like hours, she saw it, a sliver of moonlight breaking through a crack in the rock face ahead. They squeezed through the fissure and tumbled out into the cold night air. They were on the side of the mountain, surrounded by dense forest. "We made it," Audrey gasped, hugging him. A twig snapped. Audrey spun around. Standing in the clearing, blocking their path, was Victor Crowley. He held a gun, a silver-plated pistol that glinted in the moonlight. "Very resourceful, Miss Bennet," Victor said smoothly. "I really should have just killed you the first day." "Victor," Audrey said, pushing Toby behind her. "You don't have to do this. Dominic will know. Dominic is likely dead by now. My associates are very thorough. And once I dispose of the heir," he aimed the gun at Toby, "the pack will need a strong leader to guide them through the tragedy." "Me." "You're insane," Audrey spat. "I'm practical." Victor cocked the hammer. "Goodbye, Miss Bennet." Audrey braced herself. She didn't close her eyes. She looked right at him, shielding Toby with every inch of her body. Bang! The gunshot echoed through the forest. Audrey flinched, but she felt no pain. She opened her eyes. Victor was standing there, looking confused. A small red bloom was spreading on his chest. He looked down at it, then back at Audrey. "Oh," he said softly. He crumpled to the ground. Behind him, emerging from the shadows of the trees, was Dominic Hale. He was in human form, wearing tattered pants, bleeding from a dozen wounds on his chest and arms. He held a smoking gun in his hand. "Dominic!" Audrey screamed. He didn't answer. He dropped the gun and fell to his knees, his strength finally giving out. "Daddy!" Toby shrieked, breaking from Audrey's grip and running to his father. Audrey ran too. She fell to her knees beside Dominic. He was pale, his skin clammy. The wounds on his chest were deep, claw marks. He had fought an army to get here. "Audrey," he rasped, his eyes struggling to focus. "Toby, is he... He's safe. He's right here," Audrey said, pressing her hands against the worst of Dominic's wounds to staunch the bleeding. "You saved us." "You saved him," Dominic whispered. His hand came up, trembling, and cupped Audrey's cheek. His thumb brushed her lip. "I knew. You would." His eyes rolled back, and his hand fell. "No! Dominic, stay with me!" Audrey yelled, checking his pulse. It was faint and thready. "Help!" she screamed into the empty forest. "Somebody help us!" From the distance, answering howls erupted. The pack was coming. But looking at Dominic's grey face, Audrey feared they were too late. The next 48 hours were a blur of antiseptic smells and hushed whispers. Dominic had been airlifted to the pack's private medical facility deep within the estate. The best shifter doctors in the country had been flown in. Audrey sat in the waiting room. She refused to leave. She was still wearing her dirty clothes from the mines, her face streaked with mud and dried blood. None of it hers. Toby was asleep on the bench beside her, his head in her lap. He wouldn't let anyone else touch him. Not the nurses, not the guards. Only Audrey. Silas approached her, looking humbled. He handed her a cup of coffee. "Any news?" Audrey asked, her voice cracking. "He's out of surgery," Silas said quietly. "But the silver poisoning. The bullets Victor's men used in the ambush were laced with liquid silver. It prevents healing. His wolf is fighting it, but it's a stalemate." "Can I see him?" "Normally no, but the beta has authorized it." "Victor is dead," Audrey said, confused. "Not Victor." Silas stepped aside. Lydia stood there. She looked different. The haughtiness was gone. Her arm was in a sling, and she looked exhausted. "I'm acting beta until Dominic wakes," Lydia said. "I found him in the canyon. I got the warning to him, but not fast enough to stop the first volley. I drove the extraction vehicle." Audrey looked at her. "You saved him." "I cleaned up my mess," Lydia corrected. "Or tried to." "Go in, Audrey. He's asking for you. Or he's delirious. Probably both." Audrey gently woke Toby and left him with Silas, who looked terrified to be babysitting but nodded solemnly, and entered the ICU room. Dominic lay in the bed, hooked up to a dozen machines. He looked small for the first time. The invincibility was stripped away. Audrey pulled a chair up to the bed. She took his hand. It was hot. Too hot. The fever was raging. "Dominic," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened. The amber fire in them was dim, like dying embers. "Audrey," he breathed. "Toby? He's safe. He's outside sleeping. He's waiting for you." "Good." He closed his eyes again. "I'm tired, Audrey. The cold, it's spreading." "No." Audrey squeezed his hand. "You don't get to be tired. You are the Alpha King. You survived an ambush. You survived Victor. You are not dying in a bed." "My wolf is quiet," he murmured. "I can't feel him." Audrey felt a panic rise. For a shifter, losing their wolf was death. She leaned in close. She needed to reach him. Not the king, not the wolf, the man. "Do you remember the first day?" she whispered, brushing the hair from his sweaty forehead. "You told me I smelled like patience. Well, I'm out of patience, Dominic. I need you to fight. Toby needs his father. And I—" She paused. Her breath hitched. "And I need you." Dominic's eyes opened again. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Why?" he rasped. "I threatened you. I imprisoned you. And you came for me. You took a bullet for me." Audrey leaned down and pressed her forehead against his. "I never ran from your son's bite. I'm not running from yours. Wake up, wolf. Bite back." Something shifted in the room. The air pressure dropped. The monitor beeped faster. Under Audrey's hand, Dominic's skin rippled. A low growl started deep in his chest. It wasn't a growl of pain. It was a growl of possession, of life. His hand tightened around hers, crushing in its strength. "Audrey," he growled, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with power. The amber in his eyes flared bright, glowing in the dim room. The fever broke in an instant, sweat evaporating off his skin. He took a deep, ragged breath. The silver was being purged. His wolf had heard her call. Audrey pulled back, sobbing with relief. Dominic didn't let go of her hand. He pulled it to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 months later. The snow was falling softly on Blackwood Manor, turning the fortress into a winter palace. The atmosphere inside, however, was warm and loud. The great hall was filled with pack members, dignitaries from other territories, and friends. In the center of the room, Toby, dressed in a miniature tuxedo, was running around with 3 other wolf pups. He was laughing. "Careful with the vase, Toby," Audrey called out from the side of the room. "Okay, Audrey," he shouted back, clearly, confidently. Audrey smiled, sipping her cider. He still had his moments, still needed his quiet time and his squishy ball, but he was a happy, healthy boy. "He listens to you better than he listens to me," a deep voice rumbled beside her. Dominic appeared, wrapping an arm around her waist. He looked healthy, strong, and devastatingly handsome in his formal wear. The scars on his chest were faded, just memories of a war they had won. "That's because I'm scary," Audrey teased, leaning into him. "Terrifying," Dominic agreed, kissing the top of her head. The crowd quieted as Dominic raised a hand. "Friends pack," Dominic's voice boomed. "We have been through a dark winter. We have purged the rot from our roots. We have rebuilt our alliances." He nodded to the back of the room, where Lydia stood. She gave a small, respectful bow. She had been exiled from the inner circle, but allowed to remain in the pack as a low-ranking member to work off her debt. It was mercy, and she knew it. "But we would not be here without the courage of one person," Dominic continued. He turned to Audrey. Audrey's face heated up. "Dominic, don't." Audrey Bennett came into the lion's den with nothing but a bag of toys and a heart of steel, Dominic said, looking at her with such raw adoration that the room felt intimate despite the crowd. "She faced down an alpha, tamed a feral pup, and saved my life. She bit back." He dropped to one knee. The room gasped. Alphas did not kneel, not ever. "Audrey," Dominic said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "You are not a wolf. You have no claws, but you have the soul of a Luna. You are the only one who can lead this pack by my side. Will you be ours?" Audrey looked at him. She looked at Toby, who had stopped playing and was grinning, giving her a thumbs up. She looked at the ring, a black diamond set in silver. "I'm still going to make you do therapy," she warned, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm counting on it." Dominic smiled. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alpha." Dominic stood and kissed her, a searing, passionate kiss that sealed her fate and her future. The room erupted in howls, joyous, welcoming howls that shook the rafters. Audrey Bennett, the human therapist, had walked into the room of monsters. She hadn't run. She hadn't screamed. She had smiled, and in doing so, she had found her home. And that is the story of how a little patience and a lot of bravery tamed the wildest of hearts. If you loved Audrey's courage and Dominic's redemption, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. What was your favorite part? The bite? The rescue? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a romance that bites back. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.